We are going to turn to Ryan McAnnally Linz, who is the Associate Director of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture, who is going to talk about, among other things, a life worth living and teaching for human thriving. So, Ryan, welcome.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. And can everyone see the
Looks so good.
presentation? Wonderful. All right. So, um, I'm here to talk about life worth living. I'm going to start by talking about driving. When you drive out of your driveway, which way do you turn? I haven't given you enough information to answer the question, right? Because it depends on where you're going. If I'm going to pick my son up from after school basketball, I turn left. If I'm driving to work, I turn right. As it happens, my neighborhood is set up so those are fixable mistakes. But the right way to go depends on where I'm trying to go. Different destinations require different routes. Now, what I want to claim is that as with driving, so with entrepreneurship, there are countless decisions that depend on what kind of an enterprise an entrepreneur is trying to build. I'm a theologian, and I've been in school basically my whole life, either as a student or a teacher. And so if I try to give you all private sector examples of this, they're probably going to wind up laughable. So I'll give you an example from the center where I work, the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. So our founder was aiming at a very particular thing, was aiming at building a public-facing research center in a divinity school at a pluralistic university. And to get here to the thing that we've got, which is a public facing research center in that sort of situation, rather than either an academic facing research center or something like a university public relations office, required a particular set of decisions. There's a kind of a route here that very easily, without having that destination in mind, could have veered off to giving us something that looked like either of those two options, right? What he needed to do was create a team of scholars who can communicate outside the academy and communicators who can understand scholarship deeply enough to communicate about it, not in a public relations sort of way, but in a real deep communicating to a broader public the actual fruit of our research. It's a different thing, different destination required a different route. And I think the driving metaphor goes even further. For some destinations, there are lots of routes that can get us there. If you'd ask me right now, I could think of 10 or 20 different routes to work with, different like variations here and there. And some of them would generally be faster than others, right? Like I've kind of got my main way to go. But in certain conditions, like the surprise road closures that have been cropping up on my commute recently, or like a school holiday, an unusual route might be the most efficient. Today, I found myself turning around, getting on the highway, and taking like a probably like a 10-mile detour as the fastest way to get here. But that's because I know there are lots of different ways to get to this one place from where I'm starting. There are other destinations, however, that really constrain at least part of the route or even the means of transport. So I lived in Bolivia for a while, right after college, and there are tons of towns in Bolivia in the highlands or in the kind of like jungle regions where there's literally only one road into town and one road out. So if you're trying to get there, maybe the last 20, 30, 50 miles of your trip, which could be like 10 hours, is this one road, right? That destination really constrains your route. As long as I could try as long as I want, but I couldn't find a driving route from here in New Haven, Connecticut to like Bermuda, right? There are some places you're trying to get that even the means of transportation, like that's got to be boat or plane. There's no other way. Um, so again, kind of, I think this applies in an entrepreneurial sort of setting. And here I will venture a private sector example and forgive me if it's ham-fisted. So I would imagine that there are quite a variety of routes to a sellable pharmaceutical startup. If selling quickly and lucratively is the goal, kind of all of those routes might be open. And it's a matter of discerning between them based on sort of different strategic uh, reasons or priorities or whatever. But that's really different than if the fundamental goal is to cure a particular disease, right? That's taken a lot of options off the table. The kind of enterprise, what it's going to need, all of those sorts of things. Now, the end has determined them. The basic shape is set. That's not to say that every detail is worked out, that there's no degrees of freedom, but uh, with certain kinds of ends, the means are going to be pretty well determined. They're going to be constrained. So what I'm getting at here is that ends matter. Um, Indeed, I want to say that they're the main thing that matters. That uh, whether it's entrepreneurship or really any other kind of human activity, the direction, the goal, the aim is what gives shape and meaning to the process. So when someone's thinking about building an enterprise, the decisive question I want to say is what are we trying to build? What's the aim here? Um, and then even more than that, underneath that question, hanging out in the background, and I think we often miss this, is an even deeper one. So we ask, what are we trying to build? We can ask beneath that, what's worth building? Because presumably our decisions to go after this or that, to have a certain end in mind, aren't based just on whim, but on maybe an intuition, a vague sense, or a clearly defined idea that something about this matters, that there's something worthy here, that there's some kind of something about it that justifies the investment of time, energy, money. Um, and underneath, well, let me say this. This is different than the what are we trying to build question, which is merely descriptive. It's also different from what do we want to build, which is also a descriptive question, because that's about kind of looking inside or kind of sitting down around a table and saying, yeah, what are our desires? What do they happen to be? Uh, this last question, the what is worth building question, is normative. It brings questions of value and purpose and the kind of like moral truth of what is good in the world onto the scene. And the ultimate background there is it's got to be some usually implicit, I'm going to say, vision of flourishing life. The kind of deepest question here is what does it mean to flourish? What really matters and why? What shape of human life is worthy of our shared humanity? If we lose sight of that underlying vision, then the risk is that we're apt to set our sights on ends that are less worthy. We're apt to, for whatever reason, get caught up in projects that are going to squander some of the gift of our lives. And if we're lucky, we might realize that we've been doing that squandering. But if we're unlucky, we might invest huge amounts of time in projects that are fundamentally hollow, not really worth our time, our energy, our lives. For the past 11 years, my colleagues and I at the Yale Center for Faith and Culture have been helping people learn to ask and respond to this last kind of question, these normative questions about the big picture vision of life worth living, what really matters, and why. We do that through our Life Worth Living initiative, which started out as a course for Yale undergrads in 2014. Just, hey, undergrads, it might be good for you to think about the meaning and purpose and shape of your lives. Uh, Over the past decade or so, it's spread to dozens of campuses around the world. We have faculty adapting this approach to their different contexts, as far apart as Hong Kong, and this upcoming year, a seminary in Nigeria. right? And undergraduate focused, but all sorts of different faculties and departments. We've also expanded outside the academy. So the kind of what's a life worth living question doesn't end when you graduate from college. It doesn't start there either. So it's spread to secondary schools, it's spread to community courses and retreats, and pretty recently to a book, the Life Worth Living, A Guide to What Matters Most, that I co-authored with a couple of my colleagues. Um, and all of this is built around these kind of four key principles that I want to present to you and suggest might have something to do with your work with or as entrepreneurs. The basic approach is to dig beneath the surface of the habitual autopilot sort of ways that we live most of our lives. It's good. We need habits. If we were thinking all the time, life wouldn't work. Um, but we need to go deeper than that. We need to dig beneath the surface and move deeper than questions of strategy, of desires and goals and vision to the real bedrock of discerning what really matters, what's really worth investing our lives in. And that means that our first key principle is what we call pursuit of existential meaning. We're after the real deep, significant truths of our lives, what gives them significance, what gives them purpose, what gives them weight. Um, Second key principle we call first person engagement. And it's no use asking this kind of question in an abstract, distant sort of way, right? When you're asking about the shape of our lives, doing that kind of at arm's length is just silly. You have to be personally invested. I imagine that's the sort of thing that's obvious to those of you who work on entrepreneurship. It's the kind of thing that only works if you have skin in the game, and same here with these questions. Now, those of us who started this program are all Christian theologians, but we're at Yale, which is a pluralist university. And so we've intentionally built it in a way to foster truth-seeking pluralism, where we have these conversations across lines of religious, philosophical, and cultural difference, where we don't just try to understand each other or just try to dig in and see what's the kind of one connected truth that we all believe in. We let the disagreements get on the table and we seek truth together, even though we almost never all wind up agreeing on things. And that word together brings us to our fourth key principle, which is participation in what we call a community of practice. And basic idea is deep reflection on what matters and why works best when we do it together and when we support each other in the process. When there are kind of norms of engagement around these questions. So you imagine in a classroom, you got to set norms. How are we going to relate to each other? How are we going to listen? How are we going to respond? All of that sort of stuff. And that's what we're after. Okay, last few minutes. I've been told that I am permitted to make a pitch, which seems like a very entrepreneurial thing to do. So here's my pitch. I think that bringing the kinds of questions we address in Life Worth Living to your work with entrepreneurs will dramatically deepen their understandings of the ends they're pursuing. It will give them to pursue better ends, and it will build a firmer foundation for all of their work. I think that the kind of normative reflection on ends that we foster is maybe the best thing that thinking about faith and entrepreneurship together can provide for entrepreneurship. Because faiths are, generally speaking, they include these visions of what matters and why, and they're deep, rich sources for not kind of techniques to become more efficient for a given end, but for real thinking about what ends are worth pursuing. Here are a couple of ways you could get involved. You could pick up Life Worth Living, do some discernment for yourself, and then figure out ways that might interact with whether you've got students or whether you've got clients or whoever it is who you're working with. I gather that Brett and Corey have already done something like this with at least one of their courses at Miami. And the idea that this might find its way into a course is the kind of like main pitch I want to give you. We've got a pedagogy fellowship. We're in the third and final year of a 3-year cycle, and it comes with some really good benefits. They're up to $15,000 of honoraria for faculty members and $4,500 for grad students. If there are any grad students here, I promise you it's less work for the grad students. This is not just another case of grad students being compensated less for the same work, which happens all the time. We were pretty committed to not doing that. Um, uh, it involves an in-person 4-day retreat in New Haven next June. You get to come hang out at Yale, experience some of this for yourself. And we've run this in the past. Folks have said it's transformative, not just for your teaching, but for your thinking, for your living. And then we've got kind of down to brass tacks, 7 Zoom syllabus design sessions where you get together with your peers and with kind of guide from the project team to work this approach into an actually deliverable class. We've already had multiple faculty and grad students at business schools, Tulane, Mount St. Mary's, University of Lucerne in Switzerland, go through this program, and they found it to be really, really valuable. So I'd be happy to put you in touch with them if you're looking for a testimonial. Go to lifeworthliving.yale.edu/fellowship if this is of interest to you. But applications are due December 2nd. So the time is now. Got to act fast. We don't know if there will be more funding for this in the future. All right. It's a bit of a whirlwind. I have not been looking at the chat, hoping there's time for at least 1 or 2 questions here.
I will leave you to answer the questions. Kyle asks a great one. We are going to go to a very short break before our last session. Ryan, thank you so much. We really appreciate it, and for your partnership. So we'll be mentioning the Yale Center for Faith and Culture again in the closing statements, but thank you so much. Wonderful.
Spectacular. Thank you very much. Did you want me to answer that question now or on the side with Kyle?
Let's call it on the side, if
Sounds
that's okay.
good.
All right.
Thanks, Corey.